Thank you everyone for joining us today. Today our web seminar is called The Agile PMP, Teaching an Old Dog New Tricks, presented by Mike Kodemeyer. Today's seminar will be 1 hour long, including a Q&A session. My name is Shelly Kerber, and I'm a marketing specialist at ASPE, and I'd like to take a few minutes to go over some procedures. All attendees will be muted to prevent background noise and interruptions. We'll be taking questions throughout the presentation through the Q&A and chat functions. In some instances, I'll answer your question immediately. For questions beneficial to the entire group, we'll address as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. The presentation and a survey will be emailed to you by Friday. For those of you who do not know ASPE, we are a training services firm focused on providing our customers with courses related to the software development lifecycle. We have a skills-based curriculum of courses, and we offer public sessions as well as customized courses that can be held at client locations. Let me now briefly introduce our presenter, Mike. Mike is a product consultant and Agile expert for version 1. Prior to joining version 1, Mike was a senior project manager for Check Free Corporation, where he led a portfolio of projects for online banking and bill payment business unit. Mike has a traditional project management background and has worked primarily with Agile methodologies for the past 4 years. Mike is a certified PMP project manager and a certified Scrum Master. Now I'll pass things over to you, Mike.
Hey, Shelley. Thank you so much for having me out here today. I appreciate everybody joining me. We've got a great turnout. The title of the talk, as Shelley mentioned, is The Agile PMP, Teaching an Old Dog New Tricks. Let me lay out a little bit about what I think we're going to try to get accomplished today. So why are we here? This talk is really about how we can use terminology, traditional terminology that the business understands, to introduce and to, I guess, sell or evangelize Agile principles. What we're going to do today is talk a bit about traditional project management and its fundamental mission. I'm going to try really hard not to beat the fundamentals too hard, because we are pretty short on time. This talk was originally given down at the SQE conference in Orlando, and it was done in a 90-minute format, so we have a lot to cover. We're going to talk about some of the limitations of traditional project management and make a case that Agile methodologies can help us fill in some of those gaps. I also want you guys to understand that my fundamental bent here is that Agile doesn't replace what you know about project management, but what it's going to do is it's going to complement your existing tools, and it's going to give you a way of helping to manage projects really in the face of uncertainty and sometimes even constant change. We're going to talk a little bit about the principles behind Agile project management and how they fit in with the PMI framework. As Shelley mentioned, I do have a traditional PMP background. I keep my PMP certification up, and while I really do teach and evangelize Agile full-time, I don't really consider myself an Agile purist. I tend to take a bit more of a pragmatic look at the Agile movement and how we can draw some practical tools that will help us in our current project and help us get down the road in some of our software projects to delivering more reliable project performance. So really, as we leave here at the end of the hour, I want to make sure that you take away a new way of looking at Agile project management and its relationship to traditional project management, and maybe most importantly, its relationship to the concepts that are taught in the PMBOK. And hopefully you'll also take away a few things that you can really start doing today, no matter what your environment is, to help transform yourself and hopefully maybe even your organization some into a more Agile organization. So I think we could all probably agree on what are the fundamentals of project management. These 5 bullets I grabbed from a fellow named Glenn Alleman. I don't know if any of you follow his blog. He actually posts on a TypePad site called Herding Cats. And he's been beating the drum lately about what is project management. Well, as project managers, we're answering the questions: when will the project be done? How much will it cost? Do we all agree what it looks like when it's done? What are the risks to delivering on time and on schedule? And how are we going to mitigate these risks so that we can get the project completed and meet our customers' expectations? So as project managers, we spend a lot of our time balancing the triple constraints. We recognize that there's a dynamic relationship between time, cost, and scope. And we also acknowledge that when one of these 3 variables changed, there's necessarily a change in one or sometimes even more of the other 2. And so as project managers, our fundamental job is to understand and to manage the relationship between these variables. When I talk about scope on a software project, typically what we're looking at is the set of deliverables that the project is approved to build. Oftentimes on software projects, we're defining these at a high level in either the business case or the project charter, and probably even taking them down into greater detail in like a product requirements document or a work breakdown structure. When I'm talking about cost on a project, we're looking at the sum of all capital expenditures, contractor expenses, internal costs of labor, and as project managers, we're tracking the expenses in relationship to our budget. So not only are we concerned with the overall cost, but we're also concerned with the overall rate of spend. We need to spend the right amount of money at the right time. And then next, we're focused on managing the schedule. The project schedule defines when all the deliverables should be completed and who is going to do them. And the project schedule also defines the sequence of the deliverables and is used to track physical percent complete. So again, as project managers, when we're thinking about building our project schedule, the scope is really starts off as that set of deliverables that we've identified, and then we break that down into its smaller components, and we reach out to the team, and we get those items estimated. Once we understand the size of those deliverables, we want to sequence them, and we want to calculate the resource needs to be able to actually get them delivered. And so based on the size, based on our available budget, based on any dependencies that we've identified, and in any constraints of the project, we basically create our project timeline. And so when I'm typically giving this conversation live, the next question that I ask the audience is what typically happens when we create the schedule? Well, the process of creating it really kind of looks like waterfall. It is, we go through, we take those requirements, and we want to do some analysis on them to start to figure out how big they are. We maybe even want to take them down into a little bit more of a technical design level. Maybe we're even having the opportunity to re-estimate on the way. But anyway, that process of breaking it down, understanding what's happening up front, doing that estimate up front, really leads us into kind of this traditional waterfall thinking of how we're handling project schedules. But what I find when I ask this question live is, ask this question, what happens when we approach the business with this schedule? So we've taken the scope, we've taken the overall wish list that the business has come to, what they want to spend, when they want it done. We break it down, we estimate it, we understand all the dependencies, we do all the sequencing. That's a lot of work that we do up front. And almost inevitably, when we go back to the business with what it's going to take to build that project, what it's going to take to deliver that detailed schedule, the business almost always comes back and says that they want it in a shorter amount of time or they want it in a lower cost. And so we, as project managers, we go back and we apply the traditional good project management techniques. And we might try to crash the project. We might say, okay, if we add more resources to the project, in effect adding more money or more cost to the project, we can get this project done in a shorter amount of time. Sometimes what we'll do is, we'll break the project into phases, because the business wants everything, but they just might want some parts of it sooner than later. So oftentimes as project managers, we take all of that analysis that we've done and we focus on, trying to figure out what we can pull out and what we can put into a later phase. So, from our kind of Gantt chart perspective that I've got here, we take that traditional waterfall plan and we maybe break it up into two smaller waterfall plans. It doesn't really fundamentally reduce the cost, but it could possibly reduce the time by delivering part of our project earlier. We also sometimes, if we get really creative, we can look at fast-tracking our projects and trying to figure out how to do as much of that project, in kind of an overlapping fashion as possible. Oh, excuse me. But what we're really learning from this exercise is, even though we can focus on varying the cost, we can focus on varying the time, what we're learning is that what is really the traditional constraint within a project is time and cost. Because when we come back to the business and we're talking about our plan, immediately it gets flipped over and we start talking about time and cost being our primary constraints, and the idea that we want to manipulate the scope to be able to meet those time and cost drivers. So when we look at what's new about Agile project management, what we're really doing is we're getting real about those two drivers, and we're elevating them to be primary in the discussion. So rather than take what might ultimately end up being a wish list of requirements, this set of things that the business would like to have, doing all of the analysis on it, doing all of the estimation on it, only to find out that the project really is not going to meet the overall constraints. What Agile is doing for us is that it's giving us language to be able to say to the business that if indeed time and cost are your primary constraints, we need a different way of being able to look at project management. We need to look at a different way of being able to manage our requirements. We need to look at a different way of being able to build teams. Because what Agile's really doing for us is that it's giving us a framework for being able to fix time and cost, and ultimately, hopefully deliver all the scope, but to be able to put the business in control of being able to deliver what needs to be delivered at the end of the project, and to be able to prioritize, and to be able to take out things that are maybe less valuable. Maybe as we see the emerging project being built, to actually change course along the way. The fundamental paradigm shift that is at play here is that we're learning in software projects, especially kind of internet time-based software projects, that not all the projects that we're working on are predictable. Oftentimes, market uncertainty is driving change. And the reality is the less certain we are about our requirements, the more we need the ability to plan and to adapt. So one of the elements of traditional project management is assumptions management and risk management. So we're really validating that underlying assumption that we hold, in traditional project management, that all of our projects are predictable. And so what we're finding is that some of them are not. And that lack of predictability in our projects introduces risk. So Agile is fundamentally a risk management technique when our assumptions about predictability don't hold on our projects. So oftentimes when I'm having this conversation with traditional project managers, they say, well, we can handle change on our projects. We just issue change controls. And certainly, I've done traditional project management for a long time, and the last project that I worked on kind of in that way had 90 or 100 different change controls through the life of that project. And what happens is that when you introduce that much change, that much bureaucracy, that much overhead, what it does is it starts to drive the cost of your projects. It starts to detract from the people that are working on them actually getting the work done. They spend a significant amount of time processing and managing that change. And so what we're finding is that when your assumptions about predictability don't hold, what you don't realize is the cost of change just gets too high. It also causes the project to slow down, and it becomes somewhat bureaucratic. And so what happens is that we fundamentally, as project leaders or project managers, we become resistant to change. We want to manage to our plan. We want to keep everything on track because we implicitly understand that that cost of change is too high. So we become resistant to change when in today's economy, in today's markets, oftentimes we want to be in a position where we can embrace change. So one of the things that we're really trying to do here with the Agile movement is to be able to take that process cost into consideration when we're planning our projects. If we want to go down that route of fixing time, cost, and scope, and we want to account for the process cost associated with heavy-duty change management, and we can certainly do that, and that's our option. But what I'm finding a lot of times when I'm talking to folks is that they want the change for free. And that process it just has a cost that comes along with it. And so what Agile does, again, is it's putting us in a position where we can adapt as we're going along without incurring the process costs of heavy-duty change management. So Agile is still fundamentally answering our 5 questions of project management. It's asking, when is the project going to get done? How much will it cost? Do we agree on what done looks like, and what are our risks of meeting those triple constraints? But it's doing it by fundamentally taking a different approach. So as you guys are out there communicating to your organizations, you don't need to change the language. You don't need to lead with the conversation about Agile methodologies or talking about Scrum or sprints or daily stand-ups. What you want to talk to your businesses about is this idea of the triple constraints, the time, cost, and scope, helping the business understand what indeed are the primary drivers. If we assume that scope is the primary driver, well, then it might make sense to use a more traditional method. But if in reality we have to get a product to market by a certain date, and in reality we only have a fixed amount of money that we're willing to spend on the project, well, by the very nature of those triple constraints, we have to look at a way of being able to deliver and to be able to negotiate scope. And we want to be able to do that in a very easy, low-cost way that does embrace change. So Agile introduces this different approach. We want to deliver working product in short cycles. We want to keep the evolving product highly visible. We want to inspect outcomes frequently. We want to be able to change our product or our processes as we learn more about the evolving product, or as we learn more about the evolving market, or as we get new information that requires us to be able to adapt. That is just the reality that many software project managers are having to deal with, and that's often why the traditional methods are causing us some challenges in these fast-paced, highly adaptive environments. We want to do less work up front that is likely going to change along the way. We're also shifting focus with Agile techniques. We're focusing less on predictive upfront planning, and we're focusing more on the idea of delivering value. We're focusing more on collaboration with the business. We're focusing more on engaging the team. What we're really primarily doing is we're moving away from activity-based project management. And if you'll notice, that's what when I popped up that Gantt chart with the waterfall, that is primarily an activity-based project management focus. What we want to move towards is more of a value-based project management focus. So when you hear Agile teams talk about delivering in short cycles and delivering customer value or delivering features or user stories or whatever, what they're primarily doing is that they're advocating a way of value-based delivery. And so we need a value-based project management structure that goes around that. And in putting that in, we stop measuring so much the activities that are happening along the way, and maybe even calculating our value based on those activities. But we want to start measuring in small enough increments the actual product that the project was actually commissioned to build. But a word of caution before we get too far down the path, that not all value-based project management is actually Agile. when I first started working with incremental and iterative methods, it was really kind of hard to get my head around the idea of collaboration and having everybody on the team on deck all the time, and to be able to deliver working software at the end of each cycle. But what I could get my head around is this idea that I kind of call proto-iteration planning, where the project planning process begins to look like a series of overlapping waterfalls. So we're still focused on delivery more often, but what we're doing is we're still kind of holding on to some of the activity-based planning that we're talking about. So if you look at what I have up on the screen, the iteration is shorter. It's almost like a very short phase in a traditional project plan. But underneath it, we're still focusing on the activities that are going in to actually delivering that working software at the end of the iteration. A lot of times, as teams mature in their understanding of iterative development, or as they're on their way to Agile, what they'll do is that they'll realize that iterations are fundamentally supposed to be sequential. So the entire team is working on the first increment of software, and then they move to work on the second increment of software. But when we're fundamentally still approaching it from this activity-based model, what we do is we start looking at the activities, and we're still kind of putting roles and responsibilities on the various activities. We're still partially allocating people to the projects. And what that does is that what in effect we're doing is that we're, by only partially allocating people to projects, that we are creating dependencies between that project and another project. By having overlapping waterfalls, we're creating dependencies between the various phases. And what happens is that those dependencies, as you scale up into the organization, they prevent you from being able to change. They prevent you from being able to inspect and adapt, or to learn from the evolving product. Because now the focus isn't on the product, the focus is on who's doing what when, which leads us to really have to have a lot of detailed planning around these activities and these sequencings. And what we want to do is we want to get to a model to maintain maximum flexibility, where we have this idea of a cross-functional team that is working across the architecture to be able to deliver working software at the end of 2 weeks. And that working software at the end of 2 to 4 weeks maybe is what enables us to be able to learn from the evolving product, and to be able to change and to respond to change as we go. So we've moved forward. We're focusing on delivering short increments, but we're still maintaining a lot of interdependencies because of our focus on activity. And so as we get more focused on value in our project management stream, what we do is we start looking at applying hopefully cross-functional team members into these iterations, and they become dedicated to that iteration over the life. Okay, and but a lot of teams, even though they've now moved down the maturity continuum, and they've got these dedicated cross-functional teams that are focused on features, we're still trying to predict over time what our project plan is going to look like. And again, the more we predict, the more we lay out up front, the more challenges that we're going to have in being able to inspect and adapt. Now again, one of the things that I really want to drive home here is that not all prediction, not all upfront planning is bad. The challenge is that if you are in this environment where the traditional notions of predictive upfront project planning begin to fail because of the cost of change, because of the uncertainty around the environment, we are striving to build a framework that allows for inspection and adaptation. And so as you begin to do that, as you begin to kind of walk through that mental model that we've done by laying out these different versions of the project plan, what we start seeing is that it starts looking like more like an Agile kind of project management framework. And so when teams actually get into and they actually start focusing on Agile and they really want to be adaptive, what an Agile project framework starts to look like is a series of sequential time boxes with dedicated cross-functional teams. And then what we do is we actually decouple the features from the schedule, and then the features actually get prioritized. I've actually been doing some writing. It's a little bit out of scope for this particular talk today, but on the role of dependencies, because often when I have this conversation, what people see, and they really have a hard time getting past, is the extent to which dependencies are prevalent in their organization. We have dependencies between resource managers. We have dependencies between team members that are functionally aligned. We have dependencies in our architecture. We have dependencies in our business. So one of the fundamental underlying principles here that really has to be addressed to be able to get us to a more mature Agile project management framework is actually addressing those dependencies in the organization. And this is a big job, okay? And I'm not sitting here suggesting that it's trivial. But in order to put our businesses in a place, in order to put our project management organizations in a place where we can inspect and adapt, because that is our business reality, we have to focus on the triple constraints. We have to focus on time and cost being our primary drivers, which really necessitates creating a framework that enables us to be able to vary scope as we learn more about the project. And to get to that place, we have to start talking about decoupling things and reducing some of these dependencies that are so persistent in our organization. And as we get to the end of the talk, I'll point to a couple of resources where some folks are actually doing a little bit of writing around this. These are big concepts for a 40-minute talk. But so once you've laid the framework for your business, and you've talked about these ideas of time, cost, and scope, and how we're going to manage change, and how we're going to reduce dependencies in our organization, we want to talk a little bit, and we want to be able to map some of these concepts into language that the business understands. And so oftentimes, in our traditional project management organizations, we're PMPs. We've studied and we've learned the PMBOK, and a lot of times our project management processes are really built around that. But what I want to drive home today is that there's really nothing, in my opinion, within the PMBOK that precludes some ability to do Agile within your organization, as long as we're kind of looking at it from the right frame of mind. So I think we tend to equate Agile traditional project management and waterfall, because when we look at the PM process groups of initiating, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling and closing, it really does almost imply a more waterfall way of looking at it. I mean, absolutely, we have to plan before we can execute. And then as we're executing, we have these controlling processes, and then we'll close. And so sometimes even people almost like map QA into that closing process. And so people tend to do some things, I think, with the PMBOK that weren't necessarily intended. When you dive a little deeper into the project management framework in the PMBOK, you see that it allows for overlapping resource demand within the project. It gives us a framework for being able to deal with breaking an overall project into phases and applying the process groups in a more iterative way. And I haven't seen a preview copy of PMBOK version 4, but everything that I hear is that there is going to be some official guidance within that document about how to deal with Agile methodologies from within that framework. And I think that's a positive, healthy step. It gives us one more thing in our toolkit to be able to deal with. And as you guys are out there leading change in your organization and you're introducing Agile topics, it's important to understand that companies don't change overnight, and especially traditional PMOs, they need to be able to bridge the old language into the new. And so, one of our objectives here today is to help you guys understand how to take some of that traditional PMI language and to bridge some of these Agile concepts into it. And so hopefully over the next couple slides we'll establish an understanding of Agile in the context of the PMI knowledge areas. So I'm going to just do a brief walkthrough of each of the different areas. And so what you'll see on the layout of the next 9 slides is I'll introduce the knowledge area. And over in that gray box on the right, you'll see the different processes, the PMI processes that are up underneath there. So from a time management perspective, you see things like activity definition, activity sequencing, resource estimating, duration estimating, schedule development, schedule control. I promise that's the last time I'll read to you every PM process on the slide. I'm kind of assuming that most everybody out there, because you're interested in this topic, comes from a more traditional background. So under time management, what we want to do is that Agile project managers have to manage time. But what we're going to do is we're going to start off by defining deliverables, not activities. We're going to strive to reduce dependencies between deliverables rather than manage them. We're going to prioritize rather than sequence. And we're going to work from the top of the list. We're going to do things like estimate based on relative size. And if you're kind of in the know on the Agile side of things, I'm talking about things like planning poker and story points and such. And what we're going to do is that rather than use all of that activity sequencing to be able to determine the project schedule, what we're going to do is we're going to use concepts like time boxing. So what we can do is we can take a concept like project time management and even some of the detailed processes that are underneath them and have a conversation with our businesses about how an Agile project is going to manage time. Okay, so we can talk about, the project's going to take a year. We're going to release in 4 quarterly cycles, and each of those quarterly cycles is going to be made up of 6 distinct iterations or sprints. Okay, and we can talk about how we're going to manage scope within those and how we're going to define deliverables and how we're going to reduce dependencies. Okay, so we can have an intelligent conversation with the business about how this Agile project is going to manage time. From a cost perspective, we can go to the business and we can say, you know what, hey, I can do all this upfront planning to tell you how much it's going to cost, but you know what? You've given me a budget. You've defined for me how much you're willing to invest. So because you know when you want the project to be delivered and you know how much is it going to cost, what we can do is we can begin to start moving through our feature list and sizing them based on these kind of relative estimates, and give you an idea of how much we think we're going to be able to build. And then it really becomes up to the business to decide if that's enough product for that time and that cost profile. Okay. The last project I was working on before I joined version 1, product managers came to us with what the team really assessed to be about 5 years worth of work. And we had about 8 months to get the project out. And that puts the team in a tough position to estimate all that work to know that the time and cost constraints are unreasonable. So again, if time and cost really is the real driver, we need a framework for being able to vary the very scope. So, when we're looking at scope within a project and we're doing our scope planning, we really want to go towards those small, independent lists of deliverables, backlogs, story pools, whatever you might want to call them from an Agile perspective. We realize that earlier in the project we're going to have our scope defined for us at a higher level, and as we move, we're going to kind of do rolling wave planning and progressively elaborate that scope as we go. We're going to plan for scope. Agile teams, have concepts like project planning and release planning and sprint planning, but we're going to deal with the realities. And by delivering product in short cycles, we learn a lot about what it's really going to take by the act of actually writing software. And so we're going to allow room in our projects for negotiation as we learn more about that emerging architecture and as we learn more about what the needs of the business are and the needs of the market are. And because we are putting ourselves in a position to vary the scope, we really need tight collaboration and frequent interaction with the business. A lot of times the metaphor that I'll use for the relationship between IT and the business in this case is that the business is really like the driver of the car. As you're going from, Atlanta to Los Angeles, there's going to be a lot of unexpected things on the way. We can plan our route and we can know when we need to be there, but we need to be in close collaboration with the business, that relationship between the car and the driver, to be able to inspect and adapt on the way. And as we come up with roadblocks, we want to be able to put the business in the best possible situation to be able to make the trade-offs that are necessary to get us there. We're going to talk about things in Agile projects like business risk, technical risk, and logistical risk. One of the things about this idea of delivering on short cycles is I've talked about that Agile really is, in its very fabric, a risk mitigation technique for uncertainty. And you can describe it to the business. What's your risk mitigation plan? Well, you know what, because this is so uncertain, we're going to break these requirements down into small independent chunks. We are going to deliver on short cycles. We're going to continuously integrate. And we're going to review project outcomes with our primary stakeholders on a very frequent basis. That is a risk mitigation strategy. Okay, we're going to keep our risks and our uncertainties and our architecture issues and the real challenges that oftentimes derail our projects. We're going to keep those things constantly visible, and we're going to manage them continuously through iteration and through frequent delivery. We can keep risk lists. We can do response planning. We can do formal mitigation strategies if your business indicates that. But what we're going to do is we're going to use Agile language and we're going to use Agile techniques to go down the path of having that conversation. So as Agile practitioners or as PMPs that are moving more towards an Agile way, we want to figure out how to bridge that language so we can talk to our business about our risk mitigation strategies and introduce them to Agile concepts in that context. So quality on an Agile project. You know, a lot of times we think about how we're going to manage quality, and we're going to test it in at the end, or we're going to validate the quality at the end. Again, just like with risk, quality is really built into the fabric of Agile methodologies. Quality is not an afterthought. It's not something that happens at the end. So when you hear people that are advocating Agile talking about test-first design or test-driven development, they're talking about continuous integration. They're talking about writing unit tests and test harnesses and getting the QA teams involved earlier in the project. All of those things are fit, to me, really nicely up under the PMI concept of project quality. We can do quality planning. We can talk about performing quality assurance and how we're going to do quality control. Again, we're just going to do it continuously, because continuous integration of quality management is really a pretty effective risk mitigation technique, especially, again, when we have to be very responsive to change. Okay, so it's just a different way of looking at project quality. Communication planning. Agile teams will talk about things like daily stand-up meetings, or they'll talk about sprint planning meetings or iteration planning meetings and close-down meetings and such. Those things are really your communication plan in a lot of ways within an Agile team. You can define the team's relationship to the business and when the business is able to become part of those meetings. Those are ways that Agile teams will communicate with the business. Within the team itself, ideas like co-location. Agile teams talk a lot about information radiators and using, very visible tools, whether it be task boards or burn-down charts and things like that. Information radiators really become part of your communication strategy on the project. And, granted, if the team needs to communicate with the business through status reports or, more formal status meetings, absolutely. But one of the things that I've always done on my Agile projects is I use that real-time information that's coming out of the team, the natural artifacts that the team is using to communicate with each other, to extract the things that I need to be able to communicate up to the business. All those things, all those Agile concepts can become part of your project communication strategy. Performance reporting, things like that. Agile teams talk about burn-down charts. They talk about cumulative flow diagrams. Whatever your business needs, you can generally extract those from Agile metrics and, typical traditional, Agile techniques. So just because we're an Agile team doesn't mean that we don't communicate. It doesn't mean that we don't do performance reporting. So again, take those Agile concepts and tuck them up right neatly under project communication. I think, some of the relationships here on integration and human resources and procurement, I'm going to just give a quick nod to these so we can save some time for some other things at the end. But, Agile does have room for charters and vision statements, project management plans and approach statements, things like that. The thing is that what you want to do is that you want to do them in a very light, if possible, and less predictive way. And when you communicate out to your business the strategy for how you're going to manage uncertainty, through delivery cycles, fixing time and cost, varying scope, prioritization, things like that. Those kinds of things can become part of your approach statements, and they can become part of how you're communicating to the business and how you're managing project execution. So I don't think Agile out of the box really talks much about project procurement. I have been in a couple of situations with managing offshore teams or the like, where vendor agreements and things like that did come into play. A couple of general principles that I try to apply in these things is build those relationships based on trust. Contracts are absolutely necessary, but there are different ways of looking at Agile contracts. Do a web search on something like Agile contracts, and there's a lot of people that are writing about this. But the idea is, just like within an Agile team, you want to create trust. You want to create high-performing organizations. You want to create environments where everybody can win, and it is possible to create contracts with that kind of an Agile spirit in mind. And then human resources, probably the best guidance that I could give on this is that when we are in really in kind of a fixed cost project planning model, where again we've said, this is how much time we have, this is much we're willing to spend. When we look at human resource management, human resource planning, what we're really doing is we're really looking around and seeing within the organization who's available to do the work, or if we've got a little bit of hard dollar budget, we might get into a little bit of contracting for the team. Agile does speak a little bit to the idea of building your team around motivated people. Not everybody is really cut out all the time for Agile project work, so you have to have people that are on board, that they're motivated, that they're really good at what they do. Give them what they need to be successful, get the organizational barriers out of their way, allowing teams to self-organize. So while human resources management talks about things like acquiring the project team, developing the project team, managing the project team, you in your project management plans can talk about things like how you're going to do self-organizing teams, but how you're going to measure them and such that to make sure that they're adhering within some of the other major process groups. So as an Agile project manager, or as somebody who is aspiring to be an Agile project manager, what kinds of things can you do today? Because a lot of times as project managers, we're not really positioned to be able to influence the kind of organizational change that is necessary to really do a full-blown Agile adoption. I'm a firm believer, though, that there are things that we can do as individuals that can help mitigate some of that uncertainty, can help mitigate some of those assumptions around predictability and the risks that are associated with those just right out of the gate. And so, we've talked a lot about here over the last few moments about the knowledge areas, and so we can begin to write our project management plans in a way that encourages Agile thinking. So we can explain the Agile processes in the context of those plans, and we can build Agile principles into the project charter or project definition document. And I know that probably some of this language isn't standard. I tend to think of a project management plan as really kind of the combination of the charter, the schedule, and then how I'm going to approach managing each of those 9 different knowledge areas. And so as I'm communicating out to the business, or I'm communicating to my PMO, I can begin to introduce some of these concepts, again, in a language that resonates with the business. It is possible a lot of time to really help the team begin to deliver using feature-based deliverables. Stop focusing on putting activities in your project plan and managing the dependencies between those activities, but begin to focus on outcomes. Now, when you look back through the slide deck and you look at some of the earlier phases of that kind of evolving Gantt chart that I had been going through, you can start to introduce some of those concepts. You can start to introduce those ideas of, even if it is iterative, overlapping kinds of waterfalls, there is value just in the idea of getting the organization used to feature-based deliverables where they don't get a big integration bang right at the end of the project. And oftentimes as project managers, we actually can influence some of of that at the local level. And the last bullet that I put on this slide is that I think the idea of earned value is really interesting, and I see lots of parallels between concepts like project velocity and earned value. But in order to really begin earning value, we have to start focusing on delivering working product and not delivering the activities that go in to the working product. So, stop calculating earned value on activity-based project plans, but start calculating earned value based on value-driven project plans. Again, you can start to introduce ideas around iterative planning. I've actually worked with waterfall or really heavyweight, RUP teams and things like that, and getting them to do detailed planning on iterative cycles. What I might do is I might keep a higher level project plan in more of a traditional project management tool, but what I'm doing is I'm working with the team on the details on 2-week cycles. So at the beginning, we would have an iteration planning meeting. I've even used daily stand-up meeting concepts with more traditional teams, and then reviewing outcomes. And what that does is that gives the project manager a lot of granular information about what's really going on and puts them in a great position to be able to communicate to the business. And so even if you're managing off a traditional plan, you can use that data gathered through your iterative planning cycles to be able to really do a reality check on your schedule, and if things are drifting off course, it gives you a lot of good real data to be able to manage those. So I talked about the idea of daily stand-up meetings. Daily stand-up meetings on any kind of project increase visibility. They establish a sense of teamwork and collaboration and shared accountability. And as individual project managers, probably the strongest thing that I can say to you, if you're interested in moving towards Agile, or you're interested in moving your teams towards Agile, is take yourself out of that middle place where you're brokering all of the communications or all of the relationships, either between the teams or between the subgroups that are in your project. As I've worked with teams on the ground, I try to look at myself as kind of that outside circle where I'm facilitating collaboration and communication amongst the teams of the subunits. I'm really creating an environment where those teams are enabled, where they can be held accountable. But ultimately, what I'm trying to do is to get them talking to each other, getting them to self-organize, getting them to take ownership of what's happening. It's very easy coming out of a traditional project management background where you're accountable for project delivery, but really at the end of the day, you're dealing with all these cross-functional teams and all these crazy interdependencies and people coming on and off your projects. It's very hard to let go, and you want to put yourself in that middle role. The more that you can think of yourself as the enabler of the team and helping to facilitate those connections between individuals, then you can change yourself and put your team in a better position to be as agile as they can possibly be. And so I've eliminated about 6 slides out of this deck because, as I told you, I mentioned I go into a lot more detail in the 90-minute version of this, but incorporate Agile values and principles. And so just at a high level, teamwork, communication, collaboration, self-organization, simplicity, accountability. Those kinds of things are values that you can start building into your project team. So as, basically what it boils down to is that you will put yourself in a situation where you can help move the needle in your organization. You might not be able to do everything all at once, but by speaking in a language that the business understands, by mapping into the existing processes, and then, driving those values and principles into your project team, you can really influence change in this place. So, as you are going down this path towards greater organizational agility, one of the things that I really encourage everybody on this call to do is to really know where you're at in that life cycle. Okay, a lot of teams say, "Hey, we're agile," and they're dealing under the weight of a lot of different dependencies, a lot of different cross functionalities, cross-functional team members, dedicated functional-based team members, and they're doing some of the things with agile, but they're not doing enough to break down those barriers that really enable us to be able to inspect and adapt. So know where you are in relationship to where you want to be. If you really want to be an agile shop, Okay, understand where you're going, and then understand what those deltas are. Again, I keep coming back to speak the language of the business, understand the kinds of dependencies they're going to need to break down to get there, and really have a plan. It's a change management initiative that you're going through, and helping people, get there is a contribution that everybody on this call can make. So one of the things I tell people is that great project managers take input from reality and deal with it. And so kind of putting our heads down and saying, okay, the business has told me time, cost, scope, everything's fixed. So I'm just going to do the best I can and try to mitigate risk through documentation and sign-offs and paperwork and such. That's great maybe at protecting ourselves and protecting our careers. It doesn't help move the organization forward. And so as project managers, as part of our PMI code of ethics, it's about getting real with the business and helping them understand those trade-offs and giving them the tools that they need to be able to manage projects effectively. So with that, here at the end, I've got a list of resources for you guys, typical traditional project management resources, lots of good stuff up at www.pmi.org. My company, Version 1, we've got a lot of great information about Agile up on our website. You can get some information about kind of the Agile value structure at apln.org, good information Agile Alliance, the Scrum Alliance, dsdm.org, and the agilemanifesto.org. If you have any questions for me afterwards, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is up here. If you're interested in any of my ramblings on these topics, some of the things we've talked about today, I've got some recent blogs on, and so you can catch some of my stuff up at blog.version1.com. I also write on my personal blog, which is www.leadingagile.com. Most everything that I do on Version 1 site makes it to my personal site, but sometimes I'll do some edgier stuff on my site as well. So with that, I think I've managed to save 10 minutes for questions, and so Shelley, I'll hand the phone back over to you.